friends. Welcome back to A Sweet Taste of HeartScapes, which is our monthly free community class. And this month, going into November 2022, it feels like an auspicious time to be working with gratitude as an emotion, as a practice, as an element of the system of Reiki, as something that is important to our physiology. And we'll get to explore a little bit about all of that as we move through today. And as always, let us begin with some practice, with some opportunity to drop in, to arrive here, and to begin bringing the material of this class into ourselves and into our space together. So wherever you are, I'll just invite you to take a moment to take a few breaths into your belly, just allowing your body to be upright and to support you well so that your belly can be soft and expansive as you breathe. Inviting the breath to move in and down. All the way down into the low belly, the place known in Japan within the system of Reiki as the hara, the energy center just below our belly button and deep into the center of our body. And with your next few rounds of breath, just invite you to relax the belly, to rest your attention on your breath, and follow the sensation of your inhale as it moves in and down. And see if you can rest your attention in your low belly. Focus your mind to this particular spot in the body. Just take a couple of breaths to arrive here. But let's just take another moment and just bring something to mind that you're feeling grateful for. Something that you feel some true gratitude for in this moment. And maybe a couple of other things as well. Up to 3 things that in this moment you're feeling grateful for. And then while you're holding these gratitudes in your heart and mind, just invite you to notice how it feels in your body, how gratitude feels in your body. If there's any small or maybe not so small shifts or changes that you feel in your physical body, in the thoughts of your mind, in your emotions. Just notice what it feels like to hold gratitude in your body. And then taking a couple of more breaths here, coming back into our circle. And now, just invite you to circle in with just something that you notice about what it feels like to hold gratitude in your body.
I'll offer what it makes me feel like physically. I feel peaceful, feel full, but even more than that, I think it's more even overflowing.
Yeah. How about for you, Martha?
Just trying to figure out how to unmute there.
I obviously had that same.
Um, uh, um, interestingly enough, I'm not really sure what I felt. I have to say, I wanted to feel peaceful and calmer and things like that. I think in a way it felt unfamiliar and a bit kind of confusing and kind of off-putting. Like I'm not used to experiencing that. So that's kind of what came up for me. It was kind of a surprise. So I'm speaking my truth and not going with what I wanted.
I love that. You know, that's always the best route to take.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm curious if that experience is, and you don't have to answer this, but what kind of the curiosity that comes up is that, is it because, um, like focusing on gratitude is something that's out of habit, like that's not a habit that you have, or if noticing the sensation of it is unfamiliar. Um, I'm curious about all of our relationship with gratitude. Um, it's something that has gotten a lot of research attention in the world. Gratitude is a very well studied emotion. We'll share a little bit about that, those details. It's also discussed in many different forms of community, spiritual communities, religious communities, self help communities. Working with gratitude is a major component of 12-step programs. Um, and other sorts of healing spaces. And one of the results of it being so out there in many different communities is that it can kind of begin to be an overexposure to the concept, right? It can be something that becomes a cliche. It can be something that becomes a little bit too ubiquitous. And then we can lose track of what our specific experience and relationship of gratitude is. If it becomes kind of too many memes and too many cliches, right, it can become something that stays at the surface level for us, which is really the opposite of, what talking about it in these spaces is hoping to engender. And so that's one of the reasons that I wanted to hold this space, to kind of refocus our attention on the value of gratitude in our life, physiologically, spiritually, emotionally, and encourage us to re-engage our relationship with gratitude, or more deeply engage our relationship with it if it's something that we already are in practice with. I'll pause there, and just for folks on the replay, the three folks on the call right now are dear friends, and so I'm forgetting to introduce myself for those who might be watching who don't know who the heck I am. My name is Michaela, and I'm the founder and owner of HeartScapes Reiki in Davis, California. I've been working with the system of Reiki as a practitioner for about 9 years and as a teacher for 6, and offering standalone classes and a year-long deep dive Reiki training program, both online and in person here in my studio. And in that time, the work of gratitude has been a really important piece of that. Partly because it is one of the 5 precepts of the system of Reiki, part of what describes the outcome of practicing the system, and because it's also a central theme in a resource, a teaching tool, a teacher of me that I've been using for many, many years, which is the Book of Joy by the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And gratitude plays a central role in that text. And I find that work to be so powerful that I'm actually offering a 9-week class on the Book of Joy coming up in May. And I'll provide information on that later. But as we, work with this topic, again, in November in the United States, this is the month of the holiday of Thanksgiving. And it is a time when we, take a little bit of time out to explicitly focus on gratitude as an element of our life and as an element of our communities. And at the same time, this can be a time when we're holding a lot of conflicting feelings. Firstly, because the holiday season generally can be one that presents some overwhelming experiences for many of us. Many of us find ourselves confronted with sorrows, with grief, with loss related to our relationship with our families, with our relationship to the holidays generally, and trying to hold that alongside of the joy that is supposed to be inherent in the holiday season. That can be a lot to navigate when we have conflicting feelings around a whole season, a whole period of time. And inside of the holiday of Thanksgiving, we also have conflicting feelings. We've got this explicit focus on gratitude, which is beautiful and yummy and has always been one of my favorite things. And at the same time, it's a holiday that comes from a very painful history, one that we don't often emphasize and focus on in the context of the holiday. This holiday came to be out of colonization and out of a lot of painful experiences that the colonizers who came to this country enacted upon the indigenous people who were here. And for me, and part of my journey, I've struggled with that juxtaposition between this being one of my very favorite holidays and a long time of ignoring that history and then coming to a place where I did not want to ignore it anymore. And then what do we do with that, right? Do we reject the holiday and all of the beauty that for my life has been there? Or do we somehow find a way to make more space to hold all of that complexity, to acknowledge the truth of all of the different layers of this experience? And that's one example of something that I think is common for many of us, where we have experiences in our life where there's a lot of intense feelings that feel like they're in conflict with each other, that there's joy and grief, or anger and excitement, or gratitude and sorrow that are all happening inside of the same experience. And so what do we do with that? The system of Reiki, one of the ways that I have come to experience it and understand it, is a system of emotional resilience. And it's a system that allows us to feel more space inside of ourselves, feel like we've actually grown larger inside to hold all of that complexity. And gratitude, which is right at the center of the Reiki precepts, there's 5 of them, and gratitude is number 3, really serves as a balancing point for all of that. And I want to unpack that a little bit here in this discussion. So if we look at the Reiki precepts, we have on one half of them an invitation to release attachment to emotions that we might experience as negative, fear and anger. So just for today, I anger not. Just for today, I worry not. Now, we've talked a lot in other gatherings and in other videos and classes about the specific way in which the precepts hold anger and fear, not as a negation of those feelings, not telling us to stuff them and get rid of them, but to remain unattached to them, to allow them to come into our life, to teach us what they're there to teach us, and then move forward and move out of our system. We do that by making more space around those feelings so that we're not constricted around them. The last 2 precepts, just for today, I am true to my way and my being, and just for today, I am compassionate with myself and others, we might identify as positive emotions, positive feelings. Compassion, being true to ourselves, being diligent inside of all of that. And in between these 2, which might seem like, again, dualistic opposites, these negative emotions, these positive emotions, we have gratitude. Just for today, I am grateful. And there's a lot of different ways that we can relate to that structure. And I want to just suggest a couple of those today. Firstly is the relationship that gratitude gives us to the other precepts and to those feelings in our life. And secondly is the specific way in which gratitude impacts the feeling of sadness. I'm going to start with the first one. So if we look at this juxtaposition between anger and fear and compassion and being true to ourselves, and if we see those as opposites, the invitation here is to actually integrate them into our life. And we do that through gratitude, which is that center pillar, that center precept. Because gratitude does many things for us, physiologically and emotionally. One of them is to make what we have into enough. This is a quote from Melody Beattie, who does a lot of writing on codependence and a lot of writing, again, in the realm of 12-step programs, specifically on gratitude. And she says that experiencing gratitude turns what we have into enough. Not only what we have materially in our life, but what we have internally inside of ourselves. Our own self becomes enough when we can experience gratitude on a consistent basis. Sometimes this can take time. It can be subtle shifts over time, particularly if we're struggling with feeling very unworthy in our life, which many of us have had that experience. It can take time working with the feeling of gratitude in small ways to shift our relationship with ourself and with what we have in our life into feeling as though what we have is enough. From that foundation of enoughness, we can integrate our feelings of fear and anger. We can step into greater compassion for ourselves and for the people around us, and we can be true to ourselves. So gratitude is that balancing point that helps to integrate all of these seemingly contradictory feelings in our life. And again, there are places in our life where those contradictions feel very sharp, or those difficult emotions feel very overwhelming and very powerful. And so we want to continue to hold ourselves in compassion as we work with gratitude as a balm, as a medicine for those things. Secondly, the impact of gratitude on sadness specifically. This is something that I am particularly interested in because, in my life, my default response to challenging things in my life has always been sadness. We often have kind of a default place that we will naturally go more readily than other places when we're feeling stressed or challenged or impacted some way. For some people, it's more towards anger. For some people, it's more towards fear. For me, it's more towards sadness and depression. And working with that experience of sadness and depression has been a really defining, part of my journey. And so it really stood out to me that the precepts, that these guiding principles, this description of the outcome of experiencing the system of Reiki, did not explicitly name sadness, whereas they do explicitly name fear and anger. I noticed it and it kind of bugged me in a certain way. It's like this experience that I feel so strongly isn't named here, right? There's no pathway for me here in these guidelines. And, as I sat with that and talked with other teachers and talked with my own teacher about that seeming absence, what became true, especially as I studied more about the physiology of gratitude, is that it's there in that center place that just for today I am grateful that sadness gets addressed. Because sadness is so much about the feeling of loss, the feeling of lack, the feeling of not enough, the feeling of missing, the feeling of dwelling on the past. And if gratitude makes what we have into enough, if gratitude brings forward in us feelings of connection, which we'll talk about in a minute, then sadness loses its grip on us. And there's some interesting things about sadness that we know physiologically through scientific study, and also spiritually and emotionally through many traditions that work with our human experience and help to bring meaning to it. And one of those is that the feeling of sadness is strongly correlated with greater feelings of empathy and understanding and compassion for other people. There's something about the feeling of sadness, the slowing down that happens in our system, that turns up our empathy, that dials up our ability to witness other people's struggles and to empathize with them. What we also know about gratitude is that it is strongly correlated with feelings of generosity, of wanting to take that empathy, that understanding of what other people is going through, and turn that into action, turn that into generous expressions. And so we can begin to see this interesting relationship between sadness and gratitude, and between the mechanisms that help us to let go of our attachment to sadness. So in the Book of Joy, there's a lot of this research that is presented in chapters both about sadness and the chapter about gratitude. One thing that we know scientifically is that the feeling of gratitude, when we truly can touch the true feeling of gratitude on a small scale, on a large scale, it doesn't matter what it is that we're feeling grateful for or how big that gratitude is, as long as it's true gratitude, not that surface level, oh, thanks, moving on with my life, but just some true experience of gratitude that we can feel. It actually releases endorphins in our brain. It releases dopamine in the brain, which causes a physiological cascade of relaxation. It opens up our feeling of connection to others. When we've been in a constricted place, it can open us up to connection. And those mechanisms allow us to open ourselves to generosity and to empathy. And so there's this physiological impact of experiencing gratitude that helps to shift us out of the feeling of sadness, the feeling of fear, probably also the feeling of anger, and into a place of connection, into a place of generosity. And it's through generosity and connection that we as humans truly find happiness. That if we look at what is the formula for us to experience deep and lasting happiness, it is deeply rooted in feeling connected to other people, feeling connected to purpose, feeling connected to life all around us, any form of life, and feeling that sense of belonging that comes with connection, and the generosity that flows from that experience of connection. When we take action on that generosity, when we do something, we move towards generosity and we move towards other people by taking some action, then all of that gets metabolized in us somehow. When we actually not just think the thought or feel the feeling, but we take an action in service of it, all of it crystallizes inside of us. And that feeling of happiness can begin to penetrate through the sadness. And I'm speaking from personal experience. This is a practice that I've been in for a long time, again, just through my own exploration of why it is that I tend towards sadness and depression, what it is that I can do about that, particularly going into the season of winter. Many of us experience increased levels of sadness, depression, fear, despair, unworthiness, grief, moving into the season of winter. I think this is one of the reasons we have so many celebrations that happen during this season, right? We know that we need to come together and generate feelings of connection and happiness during this time. But we also need to be able to give that to ourselves, right? We can't always begin with gathering in community when we're feeling that deep level of despair. And so gratitude practice has been one of those remedies that I've been experimenting with for a long time. And so I've experienced this cascade of shifting from feeling very isolated, very despairing, very disconnected in those times, to opening to greater empathy to others, feeling like my sadness is actually connected with more people. It's not this isolated experience. Sadness can feel very, very isolating. And so by employing gratitude, I'm able to open up to other people's sadness, other people's joy, and feel that connection, which cascades into the desire to be generous. And then when I take action on that desire, it absolutely transforms how I feel, even in the midst of the most difficult, despairing times. I haven't always done that. I certainly missed the mark numerous times and stay in that yucky place much longer than I would like to or need to. But those times when I can remember to be in practice, it creates this virtual cycle, this virtual, I meant virtuous. Here we are in a virtual space, a virtuous cycle of gratitude, of connection, of generosity, and taking action on that generosity. So, that is not to say that, this erases our sadness necessarily, but it puts more space around it, right? It puts movement around it so that it doesn't feel stagnant. It allows that sadness to be put into context of our connection with other people and of their experiences. And ultimately, that increases our resiliency. It increases our ability to feel the reality that sadness is fleeting, that it'll eventually pass, and that there's other feelings that can come alongside even while we're in the midst of it. So I'm going to take a breath there. That was a lot of talk. And I'm just gonna take a couple of breaths, and if there's any reflections any of you have from any of that, if any of your own experiences were sparked from any of that, or any questions, I'd love to give you a chance to share those before we go into a little bit of, I think we'll do a little bit more practice.
I'll say, around the idea of spaciousness, and I know that definitely helps for many things. And I always, understood that, how the spaciousness can help us hold things or help us work through things. And I understood it on one level, and it really got driven home to me. One of my teachers brought us to an actual physical experience of how the natural world can do this for you, hold you, and make everything seem much more manageable, or that things, put them in their perspective of on the greater scheme of things. And I just remember we were in Scotland, and she out on the cliffs and the ocean, and there's just stark nothing but nature and wild ocean and cliffs, and we stayed there for hours. And she'll plop you somewhere and say, okay, just do your journeys and stay here for 4 hours, and a lot comes up with that. But it actually gave me an actual experience, and a physical and palpable experience of what that's doing, that openness and spaciousness was doing. I don't know if I'm articulating that well, but it was quite an experience of, wow, this is what it means. This is what that's like. And it really changed how I feel when I'm creating spaciousness, and what the importance of that is.
Yeah, I love that example. That direct, embodied, visceral feeling of spaciousness by literally going somewhere that puts more physical space around us. And when we, are reflective about that and can feel the mirroring of what feels inside of ourselves alongside outside of ourselves, I can relate to that experience of, oh, there's so much space around me, there's more space inside of me. Like, there is enough room for all of what I'm experiencing and what the world is experiencing. And I think that's a really powerful analogy for the feeling of dropping into gratitude, particularly when we're in a space of constriction, when we're feeling tight and small and not enough and not big enough. That experience of not big enough has been one that's been really present in my life for a long time, and one that is totally transformed by this practice. The idea that I am not big enough for whatever it is that needs to be done or felt gets transformed when working in this way. And I totally resonate with that experience of being in a wide, spacious, open, natural space and having that generate that feeling inside. Anything else? Yeah, Martha.
I wanted to share that I'm finding myself in we're being more and more around people that um, are not finding gratitude and not being grateful. And I realized this came up for me last night of how much sadness I'm experiencing around being in that environment. It's my parents, particularly my father. And I think what came up hearing you speak today is what's important for me is to bring inside me, like find my own gratitude. Like that's going to be the buffer and the spaciousness I need, because I really can only exist in that environment for a very tiny bit of time. And yet I need to be in there for longer than that. So I feel like I need to really work on my own gratitude process, or, or and create this spaciousness, this bigger bubble around me of the gratitude. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry, that's my phone someplace. Um, I don't know where. It's over there someplace. I'm sorry.
You'll have it say, it's fine.
Anyway, that's my like feeling like I need to really take this practice inside of me to create this spaciousness so I can be in a place where people aren't experiencing their gratitude or where they can't find it, and I'm required to be there.
Yeah.
So
That's huge, Martha. I mean, it really brings to mind, one of the teachings that our shared teacher Francina has shared many times, which is around the concept of protection, and how do we protect ourselves from negativity or from other people's energy that we don't want coming in, right? And there's a lot of different ways that people approach that perspective, and oftentimes it is from the perspective of putting up boundaries and walls between us so that whatever negative influence there is doesn't come in for us. And Franz invites us to turn that around, and rather than look at putting up a boundary between us, let's look at how can we make more space inside of this container that we're in together, and really lean more into connection, into compassion, into gratitude, rather than into separation. Not to take on other people's experiences that we don't want to have, but to bring those experiences that we do want to have from our own center outward, and observe whether or not that actually changes the dynamics in the room. And so, entering into a space, I mean, I have so much compassion for the experience you're describing of like, this is my responsibility. This is what I've taken on to do, to be in this space with these loved ones for this time. And it's so hard. And part of what is hard is the mindset of the people that I love and that I'm caring for. That feels like a really impossible position to be in, a very constricted position to be in. And yet it's the path that you're walking, and that you've chosen, and it's a beautiful path. And so how can you remain well and spacious and whole and good inside of that seemingly impossible situation? And I think you've just described it perfectly, that you create inside of yourself that feeling of spaciousness. You bring with you your own gratitudes, fortify yourself with them. I'm going to share in the follow-up email after this class a pretty extensive list of gratitude practices that we can do that are, many of them very simple, some of them a little bit more complex, but that go, into quite a bit of creative depth, and how we can cultivate gratitude into our life, and do that intentionally so that we don't lose track of it, right? Because as with any practice, if we don't work with it regularly, we can lose track of it, and then it's not available to us when we need it. And so if you need to have that practice available when you're there, then, working with it a little bit every day is going to be a great way to get there. So I'll share some resources on some creative ways to do that. But the idea of, protecting ourselves from difficult experiences that other people in our life might bring to us, and doing that by radiating goodness rather than putting up boundaries and barriers between us, is a really, it's kind of a radical way to think about it. And it's a challenging way to think about it. It requires a lot of self-responsibility and diligence, because it is not easy to maintain a center of calm, a spacious center of gratitude, of compassion, of love, of feeling enough, feeling worthy, feeling resourced, when we're consistently being bombarded with challenges, however those challenges show up in our life. It can be much easier, and I know this from experience, to wall ourselves up and shut ourselves down and separate ourselves, either physically removing ourselves from the situation or emotionally removing ourselves, dissociating from the situation. Obviously, there are situations we should physically remove ourselves from. So, just a disclaimer, there are absolutely situations we need to leave, physically, emotionally, mentally, get out of, right? But I'm not talking about those situations. I'm talking about these things where it really is our way. It really is part of our path to be present. And it's hard, right? Parenting small children can be one example. Many examples in life where it is good and right and true and authentic and part of our responsibility, part of our kuleana, our beautiful burden, to be present, to stay, to remain engaged. And rather than dissociating emotionally or withdrawing physically from that situation, can we cultivate that sensation that we are enough, we're big enough, we're spacious enough to be present in this difficult situation? And that's really what we're talking about. And that is one of the gifts of gratitude, and feeling it on a true level, again, not a surface level, and feeling it over and over and over again. And when we practice with it, we can begin to find gratefulness even inside of the difficult situations. Now, that's more of an advanced practice. We don't necessarily jump right into that, right? Because if we try too hard to feel grateful for something that's really painful and difficult too soon, there can be a bitterness that comes up from that. But we can work ourselves up to that, right? And one of the practices that we can do is, as we work with the precepts, as we work with precepts contemplation practices, where we sit in meditation, we allow that precept, just for today, I am grateful, to come up into our mind. We can bring to mind a difficult situation and start with a low level difficulty, right? Don't go right to a level 10 difficulty, the most difficult thing, but start with a simple, lower level of difficulty. And just in our contemplation, see if there's something inside of that situation to be grateful for, something that we've learned, a way in which we've grown, support that we weren't expecting that came out of nowhere to help us in that situation. A moment that we were true to ourselves and spoke up for ourselves inside of that situation. Oftentimes there's some piece of gratitude we can find even in the most difficult situations. And we want to build that up over time, right? Again, not starting with the most difficult thing, unless we're ready for that, right? We might be ready to do that. And that's how we build this muscle, to be able to go into a situation that's extremely difficult and still feel that center of calm, that center of spaciousness. Let's see, we've got about 10 minutes. I wonder if we want to do a little bit of that practice right now. It's like, yeah, Nancy.
I just wanted to add something to what you were just saying, as far as like in Martha's situation too. I've been in similar situations, and by putting ourselves in the place and the being of what you're speaking of, to me, it becomes much easier to become the observer.
Yes.
You can kind of observe what's really happening around you, and start to, have that level of empathy or compassion to see kind of, okay, what's driving this behavior? Or, I mean, some of it's obvious, but sometimes it's deeper, and that there's a lot of loss of abilities, and loss of control their lives. And, and you know this, Martha, you're living with it. But to me, becoming that observer can really inform a lot. And it's kind of like a buffer too. You're not taking it on yourself. You're just witnessing and observing and gaining insights from that perspective.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I love that you mention bringing in the part of ourself that is the observer, the witness to what we are experiencing. That is absolutely a result of practices that allow us to feel more spaciousness, right? We can get up into a higher view of things, and gratitude helps us to get there because we can see a bigger picture, right? And we can get a little bit of space, not to leave the situation, but a little bit of space between the intensity of it while still remaining present. And I think actually I'm going to answer my own question about practice. I think 9 minutes is not enough time to do justice to a practice. So I'm going to include in my follow-up email a link to a guidance through the Precepts contemplation practice that then you can apply gratitude to. And I think I'm going to just end us with a story from my experience that really comes to mind, Nancy, when you speak of witnessing and getting that distance. So this is about 9 years ago, before I had the system of Reiki as a regular practice. I was probably just starting to work with it, but had been working with gratitude for a little bit of time. And on this particular night, it's about 4 a.m, and I'm driving around town here in Davis in a panic, looking for my teenage daughter who had snuck out of the house in the middle of the night and was out doing goodness knows what. This is a common experience for parents of teenagers, but there was a little bit of additional weight and fear in this particular instance because my daughter was going through some really hard times, and I had reason to believe that she might be actually putting herself in a very harmful situation. And so I was out driving the streets in a panic looking for her, having no idea where to even look, but just feeling like that was the only thing that I could do. I had called my best friend about a half an hour earlier. Somehow she answered the phone and agreed to come over to my house and be present for my younger daughter, who was 2 or 3 at the time. And I was just out on a mission to find this teenager, and I was getting more and more and more panicked. And, not knowing what to do, what else to do, I called Joe, my co-teacher and good friend, and just, needed a friendly voice on the phone. And he told me to park the car, stop driving around in a panic. And I ended up downtown, parked the car. And he let me babble there for a few minutes. And then he said, listen, stop for a sec, take a breath, think of something that you're grateful for. I said, I don't have time to think about what I'm grateful for. I need to find this kid. What are you talking about? But I knew what he was talking about because we were in this practice together. So I said, all right, took a breath, looked around, noticed the absolutely beautiful sky full of stars. It had been raining earlier that night, so everything was sparkly and the clouds had cleared. There was a moon and stars, and everything was sparkly and beautiful. I said, I'm grateful for how beautiful it is right now. He said, okay, what else? I said, well, I'm grateful that you and Hope both answered the phone at 3:30 in the morning, 4 in the morning. And that I have friends that are good enough friends who will come out in the middle of the night to sit with my kid when I need to do this. He said, great, what else? What else are you grateful for? And I named something else and something else and something else. I got to 5 things. He said, all right, take another breath. How do you feel? And I noticed that sensation of panic was gone. It had drained out of my body at some point, probably around grateful number 4. I felt, still afraid, but more calm and not panicked anymore. He said, okay, how else do you feel? I said, well, I really do feel grateful, you know, for everything that is supporting me in this moment. You know, I'm not alone in this situation. He said, "All right, so what's the next right thing to do?" I said, "Well, I think it's to go home. I'm not going to find her driving around on the streets. She doesn't want to be found. I need to go home with my other kid and regroup and just, you know, let her make her decision about when to come back." So I went home, thanked my friend Hope, sent her back to her bed. And within about 15 minutes of the house settling down, my daughter walked in the door, and she was very contrite and apologized for not answering her phone, said she just needed to go take a walk and clear her head. Hopefully that's truly what she was doing. And we all were able to get a little bit more sleep. But that story, you know, stays with me to this day, and I still reflect on how powerfully the experience of truly feeling grateful for something as simple as it's a beautiful night absolutely changed the physiology of what was going on in my body. Like from absolute panic, adrenaline rushing through my body, no idea the right thing to do, right? Can't make conscious good decisions when you're in that state, to feeling calm, feeling supported, and feeling clear-headed to make the right decision. It was an absolutely instantaneous transformation, and it was night and day in my body. And you know, that experience really made me a devotee of the practice of gratitude. And then to see it, you know, right there at the center of the Reiki precepts when I began taking on that practice, you know, was very validating that that was the right practice to take on. To see it right there at the center of the teachings of the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu in the Book of Joy. Yes, these are teachings that I'm meant to follow. And that's why I wanted to be with all of you in this conversation about gratitude. Something so simple, something we can carry with us, something we can find in any moment, I truly believe in any moment we can find something to be grateful for. Not to cover over what's happening, not to only look for the positive, not to say all of this is happening for a reason, you know, not to try to sugarcoat what we're experiencing. We still need to be honest about what we're experiencing. But to find that island of rest and calm inside of whatever it is, that sense of spaciousness inside of a very constricted experience, absolutely changes how we relate to what we're experiencing and the decisions that we can make in that moment, which is almost always a better decision when we're coming from that spacious place than when we're coming from a constricted place. So I just want to offer that story and these perspectives and a little bit of science and a little bit of practice. All right, friends. Well, thank you for being with me for another sweet taste of HeartScapes. We will be back in December on the first Wednesday. I believe we are talking about intuition in December, and in January, I think we might talk about ritual. So I hope to see you there, and thank you for joining me. I love you all.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.